It's Joanne Borbo. My paying job is as the Northeastern Regional Director for Humane World for Animals, which is a global animal protection organization. I also serve as president of the Vermont Disaster Animal Response Team as a volunteer, and I lead a team here in the southeast portion of Vermont. I live in Whitingham, Vermont, and in Windham County. So we're going to talk about VDART service areas, but cover sort of this quadrant down in the south part of the state. Really happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Always happy to talk about what VDART's doing and how we can help you. I know a lot of us are volunteers and wearing many hats, and we have limited resources and limited volunteers. So excited to talk to you about what VDART can provide to the state of Vermont, as well as to you as a local emergency management director. And just starting off with our mission, you can find this on our website as well. But essentially, we are not here just to respond to animal issues and disasters, both man-made and natural disasters, but also to hopefully prevent them and to coordinate with the community, with individuals, with animal agencies, vet hospitals, animal shelters, and make sure that they have a plan for the animals in their care if, God forbid, they would ever have to evacuate or rescue animals in their own community. So we have a fairly broad mission. We've been incorporated since 2007. So we're actually going on 20 years with our organization, which is really exciting. And our members and partners, we really, open our membership to a wide variety of individuals and agencies who may have some role in disaster response. We partner very closely with the American Red Cross. They're typically sheltering people close by to where we're sheltering pets. So that partnership is really important. We also have local animal care and control agencies, animal shelters. The Vermont Agency of Agriculture is the lead on the disaster plan, so they're very involved in our group as well. USDA and private citizens. So a pretty wide array of folks who are interested in work on this topic in some respect. So just want to go over what our scope of assistance is in both the planning and mitigation bucket and the response and recovery bucket. This is a picture from a warming shelter that opened down here in Brattleboro a couple of years ago, and our only resident there had a German Shepherd that we were thankfully able to help as well and shelter through that cold event. So in terms of planning and mitigation, these are just some of the things that VDART can provide. We are happy to review your local emergency operations plan to make sure that animals are incorporated. We can look at if you've got a space designated for sheltering the pets of your community, we're happy to do a site visit, maybe make some recommendations on how you can set it up so that it's both safe and that animals are separated in a way that you're going to minimize any disease transmission. So we can also help with that. We can send volunteers to participate in drills and exercises. Many times we're coordinating these ourselves. We'll have all our volunteers arrive at a location and we'll set up a temporary shelter. This is also part of our day-long emergency animal sheltering workshop that we offer to our volunteers that includes a component of actually spending a good part of the afternoon setting up a shelter. We also are very active in the summer, not so much in the winter, doing tabling events and just public education to pet owners. We try to go to places where we know pet owners are going to be, which is pretty much anywhere here in Vermont. If you're at a summer festival or arts and craft fair, or if it's a dog-centered event, even better. But public education is a huge part of what we do. And I'm also going to speak at the end about a new program that we have providing municipal equipment grants and whether your municipality would qualify and what the process would be to apply for a grant. And then in the response and recovery, which I think is what most people think of when they think of animal response, they think of, you're in the field rescuing animals. I would say that 90% of our focus is sheltering of companion animals. We don't really have the capacity we wouldn't have the capacity to shelter a head of livestock or pigs or something like that without the help of the Agency of Agriculture. But we can certainly assist with those operations if they're existing either at the local or state level. We can assess whether, what the issues are in the field. This picture on the very left is I live just south of Wilmington, Vermont, which you may remember was severely impacted after Hurricane Irene, looking for a missing sugar glider. So we had some animals that were missing after the storm. We can also operate pet-friendly shelters. Some of these photos are from our 2023 flood response in Montpelier to those floods. We can help coordinate veterinary care. Although we don't have any paid veterinary staff, we don't have any paid staff at all. We do have several veterinarians who are part of our teams across the state and hoping to build additional partnerships in that realm. We recently tabled at the Vermont Veterinary Medical Association conference and got actually a call from a veterinarian who was there who's starting up a new emergency shelter in South Burlington who wants to partner with us, which we're really excited about because this is really the piece I think where we are need the most help in terms of developing those partnerships with veterinarians and also finding veterinarians who can be more of an operations chief of the veterinary component and not just, we don't know whether a veterinarian might be coming in that day to volunteer. So that's definitely an area that we want to continue to work on. We can offer support for relocated animal facilities. Back in 2011, VDART actually used one of our equipment trailers to outfit a warehouse where 90 something animals were removed from a home in Eden, Vermont. And so it was a nice partnership where we were able to work with law enforcement and provide the equipment and volunteers to help before those animals could get to their long-term shelters. And of course, support for pet families after the disaster. Just because we're closing the shelter doesn't mean those resources aren't needed. So we will typically have food and enrichment, toys, blankets, whatever pet owners need, hopefully to get them back on their feet. So we can provide those resources as well. This is a new map of our service area. We used to have sort of, I would say, spotty coverage. Our teams were regionally based. They were based by county, and we didn't have a DART team in every county. So we ended up dividing the state into these four quadrants. You'll see the green at the top is actually an individual, the Guardian Angels DART, which is an independent team. It's not legally part of VDART, but we do work together cooperatively and have a lot of the same training and resources that we provide to our volunteers. So we do work in close partnership. So my region is the yellow region down there. Our companion animal mobile equipment trailers are larger double axle trailers that we have in South Burlington. We also have a trailer at Mount Ascutney Hospital, and these are a little larger, have more equipment in them. For example, the trailer in Mount Ascutney has we have a generator, we have lighting that we can put outside, and all the other things that we'd need, plastic to put down on the floor before we actually set up our shelter. And we have a couple of new box trailers. I have one at my home in Whitingham. We have a box trailer in Barry and a new trailer that we just got from a grant that's going to be stationed in Rutland. So we're very excited to have, and I have another graphic later on that kind of shows you where our trailers are in relation to our teams. We've also have a pretty robust website where we try to really have a one-stop shop. So if you're looking for our operations manual or forms that could be used or sample disaster plans for animals, there's a resource site that's for emergency management directors. So invite you to take a look and see what we have on the website. But I'm also happy to talk to you independently if you get questions about how we might be able to partner with you. We also have several MOUs. We're in the process of updating our MOU with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture to a contract since they don't do MOUs with non-state agencies any longer. So that's being updated. We also have an MOU with the Vermont Humane Federation, which is a statewide association of animal shelters across the state. So for example, if there was a house fire and two cats were displaced, VDART is not likely going to set up an emergency pet shelter for two animals. So what we would likely do is we'd partner with the local shelter, hopefully find a space either in their facility or with one of their foster homes, to help out in that situation, or the animals could go to a veterinary hospital or a boarding facility. So we've made that determination based on the size of the disaster, the response, and what available resources we have, of course. And I mentioned earlier how important our work with the American Red Cross is. We really work in very close partnership with each other, and that's been a really great relationship. This is just a snapshot of our flood response in 2023. This was definitely our longest response. Usually our responses have been very short events. This was a very long event, as you can imagine, where we had volunteers who donated over 1,700 hours over the course of our 26-day response and helped 72 animals. You can see some snapshots here of the animals that we had in our care. And I love these shots because it's usually the pet owners have a smile on their face, which is, something that's really important. It's a emotional support for these animals to have their pets close by. So it's really, I think the work that we do is important. It's important, but it's important in that respect, just to be able to provide a resource, important resource to pet owners who consider pets part of their family. I don't think this is going to play. Maybe it will. Okay, here we go. I don't know if there's any. We'll hear if there, find out if there's any.
Group of volunteers is helping take care of pets
Can you
for
hear?
people who may have been displaced from the storm. Catherine Huntley has the story.
Yes, you can hear.
As displaced people work to figure out what's next in terms of finding new housing or rebuilding, volunteers at the Barrie Ice Rink are taking care of their beloved pets, making sure that their furry friends are ready to rejoin their families when their owners are ready. Jojo. Displaced pets being cared for by volunteers so their owners don't have to worry.
I ain't going anywhere without those guys. I've had Sammy for 8 years, and he's my pride and joy. Like I said, Catalina's only 11 weeks.
Kimberly Carminetti from Montpelier was quoted between 2 weeks and 2 months before she can go home. She's staying at the Barrie shelter with her two cats, Sammy and Catalina, and the ice rink next door.
They take care of Sammy, and they feed him, and they do everything. It's awesome. I praise them very much, because if they weren't here, I'd be screwed. I'd have to leave my cats back at my place, and it's like,
Carminetti's cats are just two of around 30 pets currently being cared for by volunteers from the Central Vermont Disaster Animal Response Team. This group of volunteers stood up a shelter to care for pets of people who have been displaced.
We're moving into long-term territory with animals who may be here for a while because people don't have any options.
Kate Taylor is a dedicated member of the CV DART team. They walk, feed, and take care of the animals in their care each day if their owners can't. She says around 60 pets have come through the shelter so far.
To see these people coming in, they've lost everything, and to have to, if you would, losing an animal at the same time, it's just not right. And if we can put in a few hours setting up a few crates and getting supplies, then why not do it?
Taylor says they'll keep the shelter going as long as they can, knowing it could be weeks, if not months, before people find stable housing again. In Barrie, Catherine Huntley, Channel 3 News.
And I think
helping take care of pets.
I think the interviewer, the woman who was interviewed with her cat Catalina, said it all. I'm not going anywhere without these guys. And that is, the main reason why we do this work, is because the human animal bond doesn't just magically disappear. When disasters happen, it gets stronger. And I've seen people firsthand, and I've heard stories of people putting themselves in harm's way to rescue not even their own animal, but other animals, as well as delaying or even dying because they stayed behind to take care of their animals. During the floods, this was the first time that VDART took advantage of the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. The state veterinarian made the request, and we got a few volunteers from the International Fund for Animal Welfare, which is based in Boston, and they have bases in California as well, came and provided really much needed support for our team that had been working 24/7 for many days. We have, we don't just leave the animals overnight. We actually had a trailer right in the center of the the where we were in the which was the ice rink, and had people stay overnight. So that was a huge help. And just to review some of our activation protocols, I think they're probably similar to any activation protocol. If you needed a resource, you'd go to the EOC. The state veterinarian has a seat at the table. And if there was a request for a pet-friendly shelter, that's how the request would come. Our teams are trained and operate under ICS and NIMS. We never self-deploy. We will only go if you ask us to come, and we work under the authority in charge. With the contract with VAFM, that gives our volunteers liability protection under Title 20. And we also hold general liability insurance for our volunteers as well. But that would come through the state. We also have the Animal Disaster Emergency Plan. This is the state emergency plan that references several resources that can help in this area, with the state veterinarian being the lead. And I was involved in efforts of writing our state plan as well before VDART was even formed. So there, I mean, I'm not going to read this to you. Well, this is all on our website as well, but just to give you some idea of what our activation protocols are. We also, when we do training or if we do a tabling event, we're also covered under the contract, and we make sure to inform the agency of ag that we're doing that. And our teams go, all over the place training in a variety of issues, as you can see. For emergency situations, we're not a strike force. We're not on call 24/7. I wish we did have a team like that. But here are just some other resources for emergency situations. If you're caught in a situation and it's always the weekend or the Friday before a holiday, or it's never Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. But these are just some places if you have general questions about emergency situations. And you can always reach us through the Agency of Agriculture, the state veterinarian's office, if it's a non-emergency or if you just have a general question. And I'll give you my contact information at the end as well. We use VT Alert to notify and deploy our teams when we're on standby, and we also, rely on our team chairs to communicate with volunteers to see whether we have the capacity to respond to an event. So as I mentioned earlier, the human-animal bond is extremely strong. And back when I was first doing these types of trainings, it was a very different mindset. I think emergency managers back then just felt that, well, if a disaster happens, it's going to be every man for himself, and people aren't going to be worried about their animals. And it was exactly the opposite. So animal issues are people issues because they are connected to the people that you're serving. We know that they may not evacuate. We've seen cases of this happening. They may return to an unsafe area, or they may just choose to live on the streets or in their cars. And we saw that during the 2023 floods in Vermont as well. We had somebody come with a Great Dane that we did find that we did go out and get a crate big enough for this dog, but she was just not having it. She was very unhappy and chewing through and hurting her mouth. And so we offered to board her for the owner, but he made the choice to stay in his car with his dog. So we don't ever want people to be in that situation where that's their only choice. And that certainly has been the case on many disasters. I like to mention this survey that was done post Katrina. This was a survey done. The question raised two people who made the conscious decision to stay behind. They didn't get caught or were trying to get out and couldn't get out. They made the decision not to leave. And of those who made that decision, 44%, almost half, made that decision because of a pet. And there are many people who stayed behind because of an animal who weren't alive to take this survey. So, it's just a horrible situation. And I'm assuming that, and I always like to kind of semi-joke that only 18%, stayed behind to help a relative. That's not because they didn't care about their relatives. It's because there were resources for people where there weren't resources for pets, right? So, I think this survey tells us a lot about the human-animal bond. And just to talk a little bit about the legal framework for disaster response, both through the Stafford Act and the Pets Act, which was passed after Katrina to really address some of the deficiencies that we saw in just I mean, the magnitude of the response is hard to even describe. I was there very early on when the Superdome was first, when those people were first getting out of the Superdome and we were building the shelter and people were just starting to arrive and there were hundreds and hundreds of cars. It was madness. Um, and it was, a huge effort. A lot of these animals never made it back to their families because people lost everything or they might have been flown to another state. We learned a lot of lessons in Katrina, and I hope that we've learned those lessons well, and we do a better job in the future. But that was certainly an unprecedented response in terms of size and scope and the resources needed. So the Pets Act does mandate that local and state emergency management officials take into account the needs of household pets and service animals prior to, during, and following a major disaster, which provides you with the ability to get, funds to get reimbursement for these activities as well. And then there were some modifications made to the Emergency Management Reform Act, the Stafford Act, in 2006 that gave FEMA new responsibilities for coordinating the Pets Act. So what does FEMA consider a pet? What do you consider a pet? What do I consider a pet? What I consider a pet might be very different than what FEMA considers a pet. And you will see all sorts of animals come to your local emergency management shelter. I guarantee you. People will, consider really any type of animal a pet. Even if they're not an appropriate pet, they have them. So we need to plan for that. But famous definition, is generally the animals here, generally domestic animals that can be transported in commercial carriers and safely housed in temporary facilities. So which animals are excluded from famous definition? All of these animals, and I think the important one is farm animals, which includes horses. And we certainly had a lot of horses after Katrina. In New Orleans, the carriage horse industry is very large, and we had a whole barn that was just dedicated to horses that were running loose after the storm. This was an issue after Hurricane Andrew in Florida back in 1992 as well. But these animals, this doesn't mean that we can't help these animals. This just means that we can't get reimbursement for the care of these animals. So if we set up a shelter for livestock, those costs would be borne by us. And then FEMA also defines service animal. Of course, service animals are allowed in shelters with their people. So VDART would not take somebody's service dog and shelter it. They would be with their person. And if you don't already know this, these are the only two questions that you can ask regarding a service dog. One, is that a service dog? If it's not wearing a vest, then you don't have to ask that because that means it's a service dog. And number two, what services does your service dog provide, or horse? You cannot ask them to demonstrate what their dog does. So, and there is also a new sort of reference to miniature horses as service animals in the ADA. Businesses have to make reasonable accommodations. So there are some parameters here. It just because somebody says their miniature horse is a service animal doesn't mean that you have to allow it. There are some things that they have to show. It has to be housebroken.
Chief Reed, contact dispatch.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Brad, were you asking a question?
No, I thought I was on mute. They just paged me on the phone.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. So these are the factors to determine whether a miniature horse can be accommodated. And this goes for a dog too. If you've got a disruptive dog that's lunging and biting at everybody, number one, it's probably not a trained service dog. If we can't hold an animal safely, whether it's a parrot that needs specific care or a reptile that needs specific care, it's better to say no than to, try to help in a situation where you don't have the expertise. But these are the parameters around service horses. And there's also assistance animals. So there's all these different classifications. You're not required to allow these in your shelter, but we certainly could as VDART. So this also includes emotional support animals, which typically somebody would have to get a doctor's note that shows that the animal provides emotional support to them. They're not protected under ADA, and they have limited legal rights, but under the Fair Housing Act, you have to at least give them reasonable accommodations. And the FEMA disaster assistance policy outlines what resources are reimbursable. I think the next slide probably. And we always partner with, we don't have the ability to get reimbursement as VDART unless we're partnering with a state agent, a state or local agency. So that's why another reason why this partnership is so important. These are some of the reimbursable expenses. First, evacuation and transportation support to shelters, from shelters, includes driver time and equipment. Tracking animals is included. And then in sheltering, facility costs, staff costs, supplies, veterinary services, those types of things are also reimbursable. This is a picture from the shelter we had. So in 2011, when Hurricane Irene hit Wilmington, we had set up a shelter here in Windham County for 60-something Labradors that had been seized from a puppy mill in Franklin County. And then the storm hit, and then I thought, this is the worst summer ever. And so we had to open up our our shelter, for the animals of the storm as well. These are actually some puppies from the case, so they all found wonderful homes. And I apologize, this is pretty small, but every couple of years, the American Veterinary Medical Association puts out a demographic source book that shows the percentage of households that own pets. You can see the breakdown between dogs and cats. Fish being the number three most popular pet, which kind of surprised me. The nice thing is they're usually self-contained, so that makes our job a little bit easier. And just, want to show you the latest statistics on that. I can barely read it myself, so you'll have a copy of this as well, hopefully. The important thing to note is Vermont has one of the largest per capita rates of pet ownership in the country. So 70% of Vermonters have at least one pet. And I think this goes to show that it's not a matter of if you're going to run into people with pets who need help, it's when. The greater majority of Vermonters have pets, so they're going to be part of the equation, whether we want them to be or not. And just on the graphic from the source book showing the breakdown and the fact that people do consider pets part of their families. Some local resources that are available besides VDART are your local animal shelters, local veterinary hospitals, boarding kennels, pet supply stores, riding stables, pretty much any store that sells animal supplies or houses animals for some reason could be a potential local resource for you. And then at the state and federal level, you've got VDART, Agency of Agriculture, all these other groups out there that are helping. The Dorset Equine Rescue has a hay bank, and they can help with large animals, horses specifically. And we also have the Vermont Large Animal Technical Rescue, there are several fire departments here in Vermont that have the necessary equipment and trained personnel. These are the people who extract, moose from ravines. We don't typically do that too much. So there's lots of great resources here. And at the NGO level, Humane World for Animals is the group that I work for, but all these national groups provide disaster response. In fact, the ASPCA, you may have read, came into Vermont a couple weeks ago to assist with a case involving 60-something huskies that were removed from a situation. And they were able to take them back to their shelter. We also have a shelter, an emergency shelter in an undisclosed location where we can bring animals either from a natural disaster or a man-made disaster like a cruelty situation. Just wanted to talk a little bit about our training requirements. We're in the process of trying to develop some virtual content for our volunteers. As you, I'm sure, are well aware, everybody wants free training in their backyard, and we can't always provide that. And we don't always have the personnel to be able to do a lot of training, across the state every year. So we are working on that. We also ask our volunteers to complete some of the FEMA independent study courses. We have a virtual course, Introduction to VDART, that's on our website. That's an hour long that people are also required to take. And we're working on some other required courses as we develop our content. And just to give you a brief overview, as I mentioned, we use the ICS system. So the animal response typically comes under overall operations. And we use the animal response terminology to differentiate us because we're not the incident commander, but we are in charge of the animal sheltering response. I don't think I need to teach you guys ICS. I'm just going to go right through those. So the roles are just as they would be for ICS. So typically under operations, you might have, depending on what the need is, if it's just a sheltering response, then we have a shelter manager and probably a veterinary supervisor, and an incident commander, and that's pretty much it. If there's a field response coordinator, there will be somebody coordinating those activities, as well as transportation. In the 2023 floods, for example, was pretty widespread. We had some people who were displaced or wouldn't leave, had multiple animals that would not leave their home. And we offered to move their animals to the shelter. Ultimately, the owner decided that he did not want to do that, but we were available and ready to do that. We don't, typically have the capacity to respond to multiple shelters simultaneously, but we would typically be at a regional pet-friendly shelter where we could take in animals from other areas and hopefully help with the transportation of those animals to our location. I'm just going to scroll through these real quick. VIDAR did a survey way back when, more than 10 years ago now, of emergency managers. And we wanted to know what that capacity was in Vermont. And this is when we were really first starting our operations and getting into it. We sent a survey to 6 regional planning commissions, and we got 51 responses. And this is what we found out. I don't know if that's still the case today that it was 12 years ago, but I imagine there are probably still areas that don't have robust plans. I'm sure there are areas of Vermont that maybe don't have robust plans for their, human community members either. So we're here to help with that. If you have questions or want to include animals, if they're not already included, we can certainly help with that. But these are some of the things that you need to be prepared for, because community members will expect you to, provide them with certain resources, and pet sheltering may be one of them. So it's important to have, and we espouse this to, veterinary facilities and animal shelters as well, having a disaster plan for their building and their organization, and also having a written community emergency plan that includes pets in your area, identified evacuation facilities, potential transportation, what will you do about emergency care, equipment and supplies, and maybe your answer is I'm going to call the EOC and ask VDART to come and help me, and that's fine. We're hoping that these grants that we're offering for equipment and training can also help to mitigate some of these issues being more widespread than they need to be. Some various models of animal sheltering. We typically work in co-located shelters where the facility that's housing humans is close by to the facility housing pets, which we're taking care of. In the 23 floods, we also had a cohabitated shelter in Johnson. They called and wanted us to set up a shelter. There were several people who had evacuated to that facility at the college, to the gym, and we didn't have the capacity to respond there as well. So we contacted the Lamoille County Humane Society, and they brought equipment and food and enrichment, toys, and all kinds of stuff. And people took what they needed and just kind of found a space for themselves, for their family, for their 4-footed family, in a pod in the gym. And I'm not aware of any issues that arose from that. It was the best we could do under the circumstance, and thankfully it worked. We can also operate standalone shelters, and these would be sort of the everything facility. This is more like your local animal shelter being in a flood and having to relocate. They might still be taking in stray animals, or they may have a contract with local animal control to take animals. So it's definitely more resource heavy. The nice thing about the co-located shelters and the cohabitated shelters is we rely, to some extent on the owners to take care of their animals as well. And that's dependent on their availability. We're certainly not mandating that owners do that, but many of them did want to do that, and they came on a regular basis to walk their animals, to give them medications, to give themselves some emotional support, just spend a few minutes, hugging each other, whatever they needed. So, there are various models, and we can do any variation of these, and we can really set up a shelter anywhere. So this is the pet friendly animal shelter model where you have, you do need to have staff, and we've had some municipalities who are going through our equipment grant process who are really just planning on having cohabitated shelters and offering equipment and not, they're not going to be doing the care themselves. So this is a model where, as I mentioned, the owners really, take primary responsibility. And you can see the big smile on this boy's face, which I promise you would not be there if he didn't have that beautiful puppy in his arms right there. So really is a great stress reliever for people too. Other sheltering options, of course, when the Red Cross, when they stop their uh, you know, close their shelters, we're often closing the pet shelter as well, but people still need resources. We all know about the housing crisis that we're living in, and the housing crisis for people with pets is even more acute. So we offered things like foster care for animals, short-term boarding. Um, you can do a temporary daycare situation, and many owners took us up on the foster care. This is family getting reunited with their rabbit after he was in foster care for a few weeks. So that's really our ultimate goal, is to get pets back with their people. That's what we want. Really, as I mentioned, anything can be a shelter location. I tend to shy away from parking lots if we can avoid them. I want water and electricity and all the things that everybody else has. But I've been at in the parking lot of a Comfort Inn in North Dakota, doing this. So we do what we have to under the circumstance. And these are just some general considerations. If you have a space dedicated in your community, will people be able to have access to it? Can they get there? Is there parking? Is there water? Is there electricity? Is it safe from other hazards? These are all things that we need to consider. And having things on hand like pet housing and supplies. Many times people bring this with them when they evacuate with their animals, but sometimes I know we had somebody come into the Barry ice rink with a soggy cat in their hands that they had traversed through floodwaters to get to us. So people don't always have the ability to bring these items with them, so we're going to make sure that we have them to distribute. Veterinary supplies. Other care issues, if you're like in the Katrina situation, was certainly a hazmat situation, because the animals that were coming into the shelter were running through all kinds of hazardous materials and flood water and all kinds of icky stuff. So, that was something that we needed to incorporate very early on in the response, whereas in the floods, that wasn't an issue. So it really depends on the disaster. And some animals will come, like we had a cat who was very severely matted when we got him. And, people are maybe just needing a little bit of help. We were fortunate to have the Mitzvah Foundation, which is a mobile veterinary unit that services Central Vermont. They focus on veterans and the homeless population, providing veterinary services to them. We were able to provide some of these services, like we had to put a cat under anesthesia to groom it, or we had an animal that had a urinary tract infection or other medical issues that either pop up when they're there at the shelter or that were already existing before they arrived. So for the regional planning commissions, I don't know if you have somebody in your a coordinator rather who is on your team, who's sort of your animal representative, but this is something we encourage our volunteers to reach out to you to offer this service, and you may have somebody in mind. I did this presentation last week and got a call from an EMD who had a volunteer that he had in mind for this role. So if you want to talk more about this, I'm happy to talk with you and or potential volunteers. And we already have all of our standard operating procedures. All these things are already developed, and these are resources that exist. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. They're all on our website. And would also welcome opportunities to cross train with you at any time too. So whether that's coming to your meetings and maybe doing a pet first aid presentation, or you're also welcome to come to our trainings as well. So these are some of the key components of your plan. Number one, education. What do they do if if they have pets? Where do they go? How do they get there? Is your shelter pet friendly? These are all questions that are going to come up. And then providing, doing the training and exercises and always reevaluating the plan, of course. If anybody's ever tried to move a cow, you understand this slide. All you need is a bucket of grain. Maybe some hay. So some planning questions to consider. These are things I'm sure you've considered already in your LEOP, but thinking of it from the animal lens, are there plans in place for animals? What types of animals are you able and willing to house? What other groups and organizations besides VDART are out there in your local community that could potentially help? And trying to get the answers to these obviously before disaster strikes. This is a fantastic resource and guide. It's on the Vermont Emergency Management's website, and is a guide for you to fill out in advance of a disaster with all of these contacts. So researching your local vet hospitals. Do you have a local animal shelter in your community? Or where do you get pet supplies? Is it Tractor Supply? Is it Agway, Petco, and so forth? So just making sure that you're compiling all these resources ahead of time. And these are the resources that are on our website under resources, and there are live links to all of these things if you want to take a closer look. Just want to talk a little bit about the grant that we just received, and so we're full out working on this grant from the Irving and Phyllis Milstein Foundation for Animal Welfare. Definitely the largest grant that VDART has ever received. And really, it's a mitigation program that we're working on here to target vulnerable communities. So when I wrote the grant, I relied on the Vermont's All Hazard Mitigation Plan, thanks to some good advice from Emily, to really target, because we didn't have an infinite amount of money, but we needed to target. And so we chose the communities that were identified by the RPCs in the plan. The red dots include current locations of our equipment trailers. There's no red dot in Rutland yet because we literally have not even picked it up yet, but it will be there soon. And then you see up at top, the Guardian Angels Dart also has an equipment trailer up in the green area in the middle of the state. And so the goal of the grant is to equip 50% of the 49 targeted towns the first year of the grant, with the potential to extend those grant monies another 6 months, potentially a year. VDART has also set aside some money for towns that are outside of the target area. So you'll notice these. So I've highlighted the towns that are part of the target area, and I'm sure you're familiar with very familiar with the plan. So you can see where equipment trailers are in coordination, where there are areas that potentially could flood, or I mean, I know any area could flood, but these are the ones that were highlighted as most likely. So you may know Jack. He was very, very involved in the RPC and the American Red Cross. He passed away last year, and the idea for this fund actually started through several donations that we got from Jack's family and friends. And we had the idea to start this program to be able to give local municipalities the equipment they needed. Certainly one thing that we experienced during the floods and was also noted in the report is that these towns are cut off from the resources that we can potentially provide. They can't get to us, we can't get to them. I experienced this firsthand during Irene, where we couldn't drive east or west. And I'm running a shelter with more than 70 animals in it, and wondering, how are my volunteers going to get here? They found a way, because Vermonters are crafty. We'll find a way to do what we need to do. But it wasn't easy. So we really feel like this is a good use of these monies. So the grant includes $1,000 of equipment to shelter up to 10 companion animals. And we want to build this local capacity throughout the state. So these are some of the things that are included in the grant. I noticed that Kristen's on here from Hardwick. We just did a training in Hardwick, and maybe she can talk a little more about what their experience was. But collapsible crates, so they don't hopefully take up too much space, bowls, litter boxes, leashes, and that sort of thing. So just really basic information, resources rather, and equipment and cleaning supplies. So your obligation, whether you're part of the target group or part of the VDART funded municipalities, and you're welcome to apply in either case, that you have to have animals, a written plan that includes animals in it. So your LEOP has a plan for what you're going to do with community animals. You have to have a space dedicated for pet sheltering, and a commitment for an in-person training, which is about an hour. It could be longer. We're happy to provide more training if you want it, but we also don't want this to feel like a huge onus on you to be able to have to host all this training. So it's really just basic training on how to set up a shelter, how to use the equipment, how the shelters operate, and that sort of thing. So, and then on VDART's side, the grants are, as I mentioned, $1,000. We provide the in-person training and support, and this is our timeline to actually spend the money. So the funder we're really focused on helping these targeted communities during the first year of the grant. So we'll be reaching out to communities. I know the VEM was kind enough to, and all the RPCs were kind enough to send the notice out to the towns that qualify here in Vermont. And, we want to be able to help towns remove any barriers they might have, whether animals aren't in the plan or you don't have a place to put them. We want to help you get through that and hopefully find a way around it so that you can receive the grant supplies as well. So this is what we're obligating ourselves to. This is also on our website, and one thing you might do is your community you're perfectly welcome to put a link to VDART's website as or maybe something in particular like this for pet owners in your community who might want information on how they can plan for their animals and keep them out of harm's way. So we don't ultimately want animals, having to be sheltered. We want people to have a place to go with their animals, but that doesn't always happen. So these are some good resources for people who are looking to work on those plans. And then lastly, you have my contact information.